Hello, and welcome to Opinionated here on I24 News, the news show that challenges consensus, analyzes the events that shape our world, and that draws out the views of our guests for the consideration of you, the viewing audience. I'm your host, Benjamin Anthony, CEO of the MirYam Institute. After 843 long days and nights of war, the body of Ran Gvili was finally gathered by his family for burial here in Israel. My first guest is a member of the United States Senate who, for every single one of those 843 days, stood by the state and people of Israel in a rare demonstration of principle over politics or party. Joining us from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I'm delighted to welcome Senator John Fetterman. Senator, welcome to the show.
It's an honor to be here with you today. And I've put out this message across all of my socials, but just, thank God that nightmare, after 843 days, it's ending. I mean, I can't imagine. They have lived their spirit, in my office. Right after that, I put them all up on in my walls in my office, and until the last one. And I can't imagine. And I've had the supreme honor of meeting with countless former hostages and families, and I can't even imagine if I was a father if my son was in this, I truly would not be able to function. So that strength has inspired me, and now my career could end right now, and I would identify my supreme honor of service here in the Senate is unapologetically standing with Israel after that nightmare of 10/7.
Well, we certainly don't want your career to end anytime soon, Senator. And I know that you have the scars to prove your steadfast support of Israel. Tell me, what was it that made you move to this position of moral rectitude and certainty when so many in your party and elsewhere were moving away from Israel as we fought on 7 fronts after so many were stolen from us on that dreadful day?
Well, I mean, anyone that's a student of history, everybody understands the way the Jewish community has been persecuted and murdered. And so how could you not want to stand with that community? Israel is our dear special ally in that region. The only nation in the region that lives and defends the kinds of values and freedoms that we have and that we should be promoting there. So that was the easiest choice I would ever have as a senator, saying whose side I'm going to stand with. Iran or Hamas or these other kinds of autocracies there, or I'm going to stand with Israel. And now I assumed, and sadly that did happen, my party, the Democratic Party, would back away and start to turn their back to Israel. And now, anti-Zionism has been, now that's just a new anti-Semitism. They try to use it in those kinds of terms. And people that are running for the Senate, they are now making anti-Israel as part of the centerpiece of their campaign now. And these just raging anti-Semites like Mandami and other people are now employing those people that have these harsh, ridiculous, and anti-Israel kinds of views. So for me, Israel always deserved to at least one consistent voice, in the Senate Democrats. And that's why I was proud to be and will always remain.
Well, you certainly were that. And talking about consistent voices, we've seen the very opposite. There were so many people who ran to defame Israel, the Israel Defense Forces, to destroy any notion that we had a right to defend ourselves in the aftermath of October the 7th. Their voices raised prominently, regularly and often. But we're not hearing those voices now as the regime in Iran opens fire on its own people. Numbers vary, but most agree that many thousands have been gunned down and mowed down by that regime over there in Iran. What would you say to those people who have now fallen so very silent in the face of such an atrocity?
No, they're the ones that took It took a long time to even respond. You actually have these terrible people. They were cheering for Hamas in Queens in New York, across the street from a synagogue. What is wrong with you people? I mean, this is the point. These are the kinds of people that they kind of try to turn their look from, or they try to deny that they are helping stoke these kinds of things. It's absolutely undeniable. And you want to know what they really think? It's like, look at the kinds of people that they hire and look at the kind of people that they surround them in now. So it must be heartbreaking. Absolutely. And the IDF, I want to thank and salute the IDF, what they've accomplished, how remarkable that is, to break Hamas, to break Hezbollah, humiliate Iran, and now it's possible for a real path for peace in that region after what IDF did. That's why I will always vote for whatever Israel needs, military, financial, intelligence, whatever that's ever necessary. And what the IDF have done, and I agree for every one of them that were lost there, because they had to destroy Hamas, are just nothing more than rapists and criminals and cowards.
Well, I want to thank you for visiting here at least twice, in June 2024 and then again in March 2025. And you'll have gauged that there's a sense here in Israel that there's unfinished business, particularly when it comes to Iran. Would you be supportive if Israel was to launch another strike in order to hasten the end of that regime over there in Tehran?
100%. Yeah, I've said that. I was cheering to bomb the Iranian nuclear facilities. Can you just imagine if the Democrats, if we were in charge at that point, it's very likely that Iran could have acquired a nuclear bomb. We try to pretend and forget that thing. And I don't care if it's a Republican or I'm in a different party. What accomplished there by striking the nuclear facilities absolutely made the world more safe. And I can't even imagine, if I lived in Israel, if Iran acquired a nuclear bomb. That's the truth. And that's part of the betrayal in my party. And they've turned their back or their blind eye to pretend that the left, we don't have a raging anti-Semitism problem. They even try to use the veil of, well, it's anti-Zionism and those things. That becomes essentially just anti-Semitism.
Senator, how do you, given all of that, how do you find your home still within the Democratic Party when you're seeing these outspoken opponents of all that you're describing, which is wholly right, wholly correct, and absolutely proper? How do you still find yourself at home within that party, and what is the work that you want to see undertaken in order to course correct?
I mean, I am a Democrat. I'm going to remain as a Democrat, but I'm going to remain to be the kind of conscience in my party and remind people that, you have turned your back and backed away. You have followed polls, or you have embraced just the kinds of the worst element of in my party and in our society as well too. If that's that's part of my responsibility to remind this party that we should firmly stand with Israel. It shouldn't be controversial. And now Israel never targeted civilians. That's actually what the cowards Hamas did. That's what happened on 10/7.
Do you feel, do you share the concern that many have, Senator, that the party might follow the dreadful example that's been put forward by Mayor Mamdani, that they might follow that sort of populism and anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, because they see that it can win votes?
Well, I don't know what populism is, other than it's just free shit for everybody. Like, that's not a campaign. That's not reality. I mean, it's like it's like we really want to be pandered to. It's like, let's make everything free, so that's really what that was. Thankfully, New York City's politics are not reflective of our nation overall. And those kinds of extreme things, hiring people that refer to owning a home as white supremacy, and we want to impoverish, middle white class people. and we want everybody to end up, living in public housing and those things. That's who you want to surround you with. And right now, that's the voice of New York City. So if I was a Jew living in New York City, absolutely, it's a sad day. And as he continues to hire these people, he just hired a new one for like some deputy for communication, whatever.
We will absolutely be looking on. And I want to say, because I know that we have to let you go, that your friendship and your support and dedication to the cause of returning those who were stolen from us, Senator, will forever, forever be remembered. Thank you for joining me here on Opinionated. It's deeply, deeply wonderful and a tremendous pleasure for me to be able to have you here on this show. Thank you for all that you do and all that you stand for. My next guest is a renowned legal scholar, a fabled human and civil rights activist, and one of the most prominent defenders of Israel. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Alan Dershowitz. Professor, thank you for being with us here on Opinionated.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for having Senator Fetterman, because he, along with two other and several other non-Jewish senators, Senator Cruz, Senator Graham, have been the most important defenders of Israel in the Senate, much more than the Jewish senators like Senator Schumer and Senator Cohen and some of the other senators. I stand strongly with Senator Fetterman, so thank you for having him.
Thank you. On that question, do you think that Senator Fetterman, given all that we talked about in the earlier segment, namely the lack of moral rectitude that we're seeing in that party, do you think he's going to be able to remain in that party, or do you think that he's going to have to make a choice such as the one that you made to leave the party?
Well, he's an elected senator. I'm just an ordinary guy. And so I have the freedom to decide who to vote for. I'm now an independent. I think he'll remain a senator. There have been some switches and some people who have left the Democratic Party. And I understand that, because if the Democratic Party becomes the party of socialism and the party of anti-Israelism, there are a great many Democrats, not only Jews, but many Christians and even some Muslims, who will leave the Democratic Party and either become independent or become Republicans.
And yet there is a very real problem, a rapid rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism that's taking place on the other side of the political aisle. We're seeing many voices, many influencers who are speaking to the detriment of Israel, against the Israel-US alliance. It's very concerning. The volume is ratcheting up. How would you advise people to approach this two-pronged assault, I would say, on the Jewish people?
Well, it's not so much that there's a divide between the Democrats and the Republicans. The Republicans are still much more strongly pro-Israel. It's a divide along generational lines. More young people are against Israel, including young people in the Republican Party. And they just believe some of the rhetoric that's coming from the Tucker Carlsons and the other blatant anti-Semites of the right. It's partly a function of education. I think we're seeing a failure of higher education. Schools like Harvard and Yale and Columbia are failing to educate their students. They're allowing left-wing professors to propagandize students in the false name of academic freedom. Academic freedom doesn't allow a professor at Columbia to say to a Jewish student, oh, if you're Israeli, I'm not going to let you speak in my class unless you admit you're a criminal. That's not academic freedom. And
absolutely. I agree with you, Professor. And I want to turn now to another subject, if I may. You have always been someone who is swift to condemn, of course, anybody who participates in terror attacks against, frankly, anyone who participates in the October 7th terror attack. Of course, you didn't hesitate for a moment to come out swinging there. But there's now talk about the day after. I wonder how you reconcile the ongoing antipathy, enmity, and violent opposition towards Israelis and Jews by the Palestinian Arabs with the notion of a two-state solution. Where should we see any pathway towards that resolution? Incidentally, to tip my hand, I would call it a two-state delusion.
Well, I think the two-state solution is dead for the moment. I think you can't have a two-state solution if you have a majority of Muslims and Palestinians in Gaza supporting Hamas. And if there were an election today, even on the West Bank, I think Hamas would get overwhelming support. So the two-state solution has been killed by Palestinians who don't believe really in two states, but believe in ridding themselves of the Israeli state and proclaiming one Palestinian state, a terrorist state, from the river to the sea. So there's no possibility of a two-state solution now. My hope and my dream, the way Herzl's dreamed of a Zionist state, is that perhaps someday the good people of Palestine, and there are many, many good Palestinians, particularly on the West Bank, but some in Gaza as well, very, very small minority, would get together and understand that their benefit would be in having a peace with an Israeli state living side by side. But until that occurs, and until the leadership of the Palestinian Authority gives up its nightmare of trying to destroy Israel, there can be no state solution.
Don't you think that we might be guilty of, Professor, don't you think we might be guilty of peddling the soft bigotry of low expectations when we put all of the ills within Palestinian society squarely and exclusively at the feet of the Palestinian leadership? I mean, the Palestinian Arabs, if given the opportunity, as you've just said, would vote overwhelmingly for Hamas. Now, they would do so in Gaza, and they would do so also in Judea and Samaria. It's absurd to think that they know not what they vote for. They cannot have been surprised when they voted for a genocidal leadership in Gaza, and then that leadership proceeded to launch an attempted genocide against Israel. Surely we should be giving them some agency.
Of course, there's no doubt about that. But so do the German people and the Japanese people have some agency in the Second World War. And then when their leadership changed over time, Japan and Germany became peaceful countries and supported the United States. I still have the hope that someday wise Palestinian people will understand that they benefit enormously from an alliance with Israel, the way I think many Saudis and Jordanians and others in the Gulf have come slowly to realize that an alliance with Israel is far better for them than turning Israel into an enemy. And the reason for that is that Israel's so strong. Look, we remember the psalmist who said, Hashem ozli amo yitain, Hashem yivarech amo b'shalom. We'll get peace only through strength. And the only reason that there is any peace in the Middle East right now is because of Israel's strength. Its strength in destroying Iran's nuclear capacity with the help of the United States. Its help in destroying Hezbollah. Its help in destroying Hamas. As long as Israel remains the most powerful military in the Middle East, we will find more and more Arabs coming to see that they benefit from having some degree of peace. Now, whether that peace takes the form of a two-state solution or some...
Professor, let me ask you something else, if I may. After the massacre on October the 7th, Palestinian Arabs from Gaza came into the very towns and villages that had been massacred by Hamas, which, again, you, of course, condemned swiftly and unequivocally. And they didn't proceed to administer first aid to our injured or our dying or those who were bleeding out, but rather they proceeded to loot and to pillage those towns and those villages. That doesn't, to me, seem like a people that is an ideal grouping for a partnership with. In actual fact, I think that those people should be kept well away from our borders and actually disqualified from statehood. What would you say to that?
Well, I agree with you that, of course, people who participated or even supported are disqualified from being part of any two-state solution. In fact, they ought to be prosecuted. I shed no tears for civilians, so-called civilians, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds who are called children, 18-year-olds, women. I shed no tears for any of them who were killed as human shields or part of Israel's defense. What I do shed tears for are, babies and children and the elderly who didn't support the October 7th. There are some of those, not enough, and some of those on the West Bank as well. I don't think you can generalize about a population, but I think that you can. I think Israel made one serious mistake, and I know people disagree with me. I don't think Israel should have declared war on Hamas. It should have declared war on the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip proclaims itself to be a political entity. And just like the United States didn't declare war on Nazis, they declared war on Germany, they should have declared war on the Gaza Strip. And
Well, Professor, just because of our time, I can tell you as a veteran of this war who served in the Gaza Strip knows very, very well that war was waged against it. And thankfully, as a result, at least in part of that, our hostages came home. Professor Alan Dershowitz, I just want to thank you so very much for joining me. Thank you for all that you do. And I look forward to hosting you again here on Opinionated. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And now, on another note, during my childhood visits to Israel, there was so much at which I would marvel. The street names written in the language of our prayer books, the beauty and diversity of the Israeli people, the fearlessness of the country as a whole. But there was another sight by which I was struck, and it was the sight of the amputees. Seeing them for the first time nearly 40 years ago, these somewhat older men, bereft of their arms or legs, sometimes with rudimentary prosthetics and sometimes not, were an image wholly unfamiliar to me. When I asked my mother about them, she responded with a considered reply, that these were the war wounded of this great country and its endless battle for survival. That these were, in a word, the Israelis. I imagine many of you at home might recall seeing similar images. And it may also resonate with you when I say that between my childhood and my adulthood, such sights became ever more rare, as those older men gradually became elderly or moved on from this world. And as Israel's wars, not missions or operations, but wars, seemed to be a feature of the past. Until now, that is. Now, in an October 7th reality, that demographic has returned to our midst. With some changes, to be sure. The prosthetics, for example, have been modernized, and those wearing them are now men and women alike. But most jarring among those changes is the fact that the amputees are no longer older than me, but far, far younger. And my mother was right. These are the Israelis, maimed in a war foisted upon us by our enemies. And when I talk to these heroes, they tell me that they are the fortunate ones, for they remain possessed of the gift of life. That sentiment of gratitude invokes yet another demographic, one about which I want to talk to you today. I'm referring to the fallen soldiers of this war. It's a societal oddity, but both here and in the diaspora, most everyone rightly discusses the hostages or the ultra-Orthodox draft, or of when and why the Prime Minister did or did not take responsibility for the October 7th massacre, or of how all of this could have possibly happened to us to begin with. But rarely do we speak of those who died for this country, and yet there are hundreds of them. There are many hundreds of them. Since that terrible day, some 924 IDF soldiers and some 70 police officers have been killed. And I believe that it is incumbent upon you and me alike to always remember their sacrifice. And we must do so far more prominently than is currently the case. We must do so not only for those who fell, but also for those by whom they are survived. We must do so for the widows and the widowers. We must do so for the orphans. And we must do so because in world courts and international organizations, on social media, in traditional media, and on campuses throughout the globe, our enemies are hard at work sullying the memories of our defenders. The battle for their good name is ours to wage and to win, and we must not shirk our place on its lines. So put your armor on. Continue to educate yourselves so that you might educate others. You, all of you, are needed. And with that, turning now to my childhood in England, I recall that each year as we solemnly mourned the heroes of Britain's wars, we silently listened to the poem, The Epitaph. It depicts a dying British soldier's beseechment to his surviving comrade, who is soon to return to England. And therein, the dying soldier entreats him thus, quote, "When you go home, tell them of us and say that for their tomorrow, we gave our today." And now, as you wonder what future God will bestow upon this great country of ours, and it will be a glorious future. In the name of those fallen soldiers of Israel, I ask of you, wherever this day may take you, whether to your colleagues, to your communities, or to your families, when you go home, speak of our fallen soldiers and say that for our tomorrow, they gave their today. Because they did. And they did so by their many hundreds. Theirs is the sacrifice that has enabled us all, whether we be whole or harmed, to ply the tomorrow of this land. May they have done so for the sake of a glorious future. And that concludes this episode of the show. Join me next week for more Opinionated with me, Benjamin Anthony.